All right, good evening, everybody, or good morning, or good afternoon, or for some who should probably be in bed by now, probably you, Ahmed, as well. It's really a great honor and and pleasure to be on this webinar. And thank you, Rudy and Amr, and the whole Arthur Lawrence team who has been facilitating this for this opportunity. I mean, it's a topic, and maybe we'll do some introductions. So first, maybe Rudy and Amr, you go ahead, and then I'll introduce myself, and then maybe we'll give a bigger bit of a background on some of the discussions we're going to have today. How about that?
Sounds good. Yeah, um, I'm Rudy Agwig. I'm an AI and machine learning expert based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've been advising companies on what to do with AI since 2011, pretty much. So before all this hype happened, and more recently, a lot of the focus has shifted towards generative AI. So
Hi guys, my name is Amr Agovic. I'm the second part of the tag team. My specialty or areas of interest is in the architecture, in the NLP and the processing, in the protocols, in the low level side of this of the topic we are talking today about.
Great. Well, I'm Ricardo Langvida Görner. I'm based in Cairo. I joined Arthur Lawrence very recently, and I lead the customer experience vertical within the group, and I'm also the managing partner for Middle East and Africa. I think the reason why Arthur Lawrence asked me to lead the CX vertical is because CX is yeah, basically what I've been doing over the last 25 years. Of course, the name has changed. 25 years ago, nobody talked about CX. It was called after sales or customer care. I've been leading larger CX outsourcing companies and programs across the globe. I've had the pleasure to set up programs and call centers in the Middle East and Africa, in Asia Pacific, in South America, in Eastern Europe, Central Europe. So I've been around across the globe, looking really for the holy grail of CX, right? Where can we do customer experience? What is the next edge? What's the next edge of innovation? What is going to be defining us as CX experts over the next couple of years? And of course, needless to say, AI has just changed quite a bit of everything we do nowadays. That's why it's such a pleasure for me to be in this webinar with you guys. The first engagements I had with AI, and we didn't call it at the time, was probably 15 years ago, but it was a bit clumsy. And I've been involved in many projects where we try to somehow implement either smart chatbots or robotic process automation solutions to really both drive efficiencies but also reduce costs. And something which we were discussing with Rudy and Amr recently is all the hype which we have now in regards to AI. And there's a lot of noise, and with noise comes a lot of uncertainty. With noise comes a lot of many questions. With noise, also, noise creates a difficulty to really cut through that noise and really define what is AI, how can it support me as a business, um, what is more maybe an imaginary expectation, what is realistic. And that's why it's important that we speak and we have engagements with experts like Rudy and Amr, who really have the in-depth understanding and knowledge to both challenge what our expectations or our understanding of AI is, but also to give us a little bit I would say, a grounding in what is possible, what is not, what is it we can do to implement and in terms of innovation in many of our activities. What is it which is very new, what is upcoming, but also what is really possible, right? And I think it's that type of information which helps us to cut through that noise and to also cut through the uncertainty and get rid of some maybe wrong information and some wrong expectations, which many suppliers and providers cannot meet, and that also creates a bit of a dissatisfaction. And that's something we're going to touch on today as well. So that's as an intro from my side. And Rudy, tell us,
All right. So
how uncertain should we be and not?
well, let's dive into it. It will take a while to get to the point. So I'm gonna share my screen here. Let me know once you're able to see it. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Right.
Just as some house rules, in regards to questions, Rudy, how do you want to do that? You want to do that at the end? Do you want people to raise their virtual arms or hands? How did you handle that?
I think we'll do that at the end. That'll probably be the best. And also, I'm not sure how the LinkedIn part of it will work, like the people that are on LinkedIn Live, if we can actually interact with them here. So if we're not able to get to some of the questions, they'll show up as comments, and then we'll come back and answer them after the meeting.
Perfect. And for the participants in this call, I assume they can also send their questions through the chat, correct?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I encourage everybody, should you have any questions, you don't want to raise your hand, but there's something which is really triggering you, or a question, don't hesitate to just throw it on the chat. Thanks.
All right. So today we picked the topic of large language models and automation. And the reason that kind of came to mind is when ChatGPT first came out, and there was a lot of interest in it. It was the most popular app in a short amount of time. Very quickly after that, discussion started around how many jobs would be lost, what kind of implications this might have. And ultimately, you can understand that as automation. I mean, if you're replacing humans with this technology. So for today, we will first walk through what I call here the state of generative AI. These are just some statistics based off market reports and kind of where we are today, what businesses are doing. And then after that, we will provide an overview of large language models and automation, kind of as it pertains to this topic specifically. We will then go through some use cases, and for the use cases, we will attempt to create a categorization of the use cases so that you have a framework by which you can gauge which use cases you could consider low-hanging fruits and which use cases you can understand as being difficult. After that, we will go into some of the tools that enable us to do automation. And then Amr, my brother, will show us a demo. And after that, we'll conclude with some recommendations. So that's the plan for today. Yeah, so let's get started with some of these numbers around generative AI. So if you go out and read some of these market reports, which come out every few months, you're going to find some very bold statements in there. So for example, there's a report, actually this is a study by Nielsen, where they looked at 3 different types of activities, and they concluded that utilizing generative AI led to an increase of 66% of employee productivity, which is pretty big. The remaining 3 are not based on studies, but more like projections as far as what we can expect from generative AI. McKinsey, according to McKinsey, the corporate profits per year could increase by 4 trillion due to generative AI. According to Goldman Sachs, there is going to be about 46% of administrative jobs that will be automated away as a result of this technology. And also, according to Goldman Sachs, you can expect about 300 million jobs to be lost. So yeah, another reason I thought it would be helpful to hone in on this automation topic. because there's, looking at this, certainly executives get influenced by these kind of market reports, but there's, additional types of numbers that, come out of them. And that is not just these projections, but more kind of studies that look at, what people are doing right now. And so this is, and you can find multiple of these reports. The numbers are pretty close if you compare them. This one in particular is from Insight Enterprises. I was looking for something that was as recent as I could find. This is December 2023. Based on this report, 66% of enterprises have already deployed generative AI to their workforce, meaning they've asked their employees to use it for, some kind of purpose, and they're reporting in 54% of the case, or an increase of 54% of productivity, based on these people that have deployed it. They're reporting a 42% increase in customer experience, improved customer experience, and a 37% reduction in human error as a result of using generative AI. So when you look at these kinds of numbers and you're leading a business, you're going to ask yourself, if I don't do something here, it's like we have 2/3 of the businesses out there already utilizing this technology, and they seem to be getting value out of it that seems to be significant. So what do we do about it? And this is pretty realistic and reflecting what we also see with clients. Statements along the lines as if you don't do something here, we may be at a competitive disadvantage. And so there are businesses that feel pressured to explore this technology because it seems like the world as we know it is kind of changing, and they don't want to be left behind. So now, and obviously, like you could think of these, these are some pretty bold statements. And the reality of it is, if you kind of try to find business use cases where you see sort of these huge improvements, it seems like it's difficult to find them. And it seems like there's a lot of challenges in implementing this technology. Like you could also, doubt some of these numbers that you see. And in particular, some of these market report companies, they don't necessarily have a reputation for being exactly right, because this isn't the first hype that you're in. We have digital transformation before. We had all sorts of the dot-com kind of bubble. Overblown expectations, they also tend to be reflected in these market reports. But here, this is a study that's a bit more, I guess, on a sobering end or more realistic. In this study, they were looking at about 5,000 employees in a call center, and they found that the overall boost in productivity was 14%. And in this particular study, they put in an effort to sort of find a way to more coherently measure productivity. And what I found is that these results are kind of nuanced in that inexperienced people tend to experience more of a boost than experienced people. And actually, for experienced people, it seemed like there was a very minimal effect from using this technology at all, so that it seemed like it was mostly just helping inexperienced people. And it was helping them at 35% improvement in productivity. Overall, the conclusions from this study are kind of positive, and that there seems to be a positive effect. But if you compare this to the previous 54% improvement in productivity, it's quite a discrepancy. And there's multiple reasons for that. One is it makes a big difference what kind of activity you look at. Are you looking at call center activities, or are you looking at, for instance, programming and development, software development? So the effect that the technology has varies by the activity. So it's not the same across the board. And the other thing is, it's one thing to evaluate how well you do on a particular task, like a specific task, and it's a whole another thing to evaluate how much of an effect it has on an entire workflow process. So how effective, how much more effective you are as a company in providing, you know, your customer service, as opposed to, am I doing this task correctly with the technology? So those are some of the differences, but across the board, even with these types of studies that are a bit more, I guess, more conservative in their statements, there's, you know, commonalities that there seems to be, you know, like a real improvement in productivity for companies that have used generative AI. So this puts us kind of in a place where we have we have kind of pressure by businesses, you know, they're experiencing to look into this technology, but at the same time uncertainty about, you know, how to go about getting value out of it. And some of them are rushed into it without the proper guidance. And so, yeah, that's kind of the state of it. There's definitely a lot of hype around this technology. I can say that as somebody that has been in this field before it was popular to be in it. So even the vendors, OpenAI, you know, like the companies from which this is coming, you know, they are hyping up this technology. They're not necessarily being transparent about what it can do, or, you know, like they're talking about their goal being general artificial intelligence, and you know, talking about these things as if they are, you know, like more advanced than they actually are in terms of their capabilities. And this you know, this discrepancy as far as what the actual capabilities are, you know, the part that's frustrating about it, it's not just something that's rooted within the business world. It's also, if you talk to the experts, you know, the people that are doing the research, you're going to find different camps that believe in different things. And part of the reason for that is that this deep learning technology, from the very beginning, as it was kind of explored, wasn't something where, you know, you would have kind of a theory developed that you prove, and then you know, go and practically show that that's the case. There's kind of a lack of theoretical understanding when it comes to deep learning as to why things work the way they do. And so a lot of it is then, you know, based on the observations of the outputs. You know, like you look at these methods and you try to assess, are they doing reasoning? Are they not doing reasoning? But there isn't like a theoretical proof that, you know, establishes that for, you know, once and for all. So let's move on. Oh,
It's a little bit like a déjà vu, Rudy, if I may add.
yeah, go ahead.
It reminds me of similar hypes which we've had, especially in our industry. Like I don't know, when was the lean impact on contact center processes, or the omnichannel impact on contact center process, or recently the RPA, robotic process automation, impact on contact center services. So there were always those hypes, right? And for some reason, you always had different camps pushing certain messaging, you know, especially technology advisors. But in reality, we saw, especially in our industry, very little change, right? And in many cases, the change wasn't necessarily what was expected, and in some cases was even counterproductive. You know, one of the discussion we had recently was, you know, in contact center businesses, most of the providers are paid per seat, right? They're not paid as per outcome, right? If you're not an outcome-based organization or process, then usually a very smart AI solution is very hard to ROI, right? And then you stick to what you know best, which is probably bum on seats. But I've seen those hypes before.
Yes, and you could argue, you know, if you look at Industry 4.0 and what's happening in manufacturing, you know, like there's very little adoption, but there are some differences here, especially in the pace at which businesses are pushing to at least try to adopt it. But there's definitely also organizational challenges that are involved in this, in having a successful outcome. It's not just a matter of the technology, and so there are definitely parallels to digital transformation, to implementing Industry 4.0, or all these other technologies where there's definite value in the technology. It's just, like how you go about implementing it is going to make a difference of whether or not you're going to be successful. So, the last thing I wanted to note here is there's some recent news here from Google, a company called Duolingo, which is basically teaching people languages. All of them seem to have announced cuts, firing people. And I don't know to what extent this is confirmed that it's really due to AI, but it seems to be. And we also had recently a strike with actors and writers in Hollywood, which is kind of a very real threat if you think about it. With generative AI, you have the ability to take a person and create any kind of movie or image with that person, and so you could take the likeness of an actor and do anything pretty much with that, and then also with the capabilities with ChatGPT, it's pretty easy to come up with scripts for movies and things of that nature. And so there's there is a real potential value to be created, but also potential danger to these people to actually, at least some of them lose their jobs. All right, so now, this is just kind of to give you an overview. So, there's a lot of activity. People are, there's some people that are dismissing this, but overall, and I also noticed this when I go out and talk to people about AI, everybody just wants to know about generative AI. It ends up being kind of a conversation starter. A lot of them may not need the generative AI, but that's kind of where things are. So let's get into large language models and automation a little bit. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about what large language models are. I'm going to assume that most people have kind of heard of them to some extent. At the bottom of it, a large language model just predicts the next word. It's a model that's called autoregressive because when you predict the next word, you feed that as an input in predicting then the next word. So when you ask a question to ChatGPT, it's really just predicting one word at a time. And that's how it works. It's a model that has been trained on, on pretty much the whole of the internet, and has, billions of parameters. Within those parameters, it stores facts and relationships. So the huge size of this model is not necessary to learn how to fluently speak English. It is being used for other things. And this is something that people have shown, that you could actually manipulate the facts that are stored in that network, and that it's actually being stored through these weights. Now, there's been some things that have come out of pretty much this last year of practical experience and understanding where the strengths are of these models and where their weaknesses are. So they're really good in conversational skills. They capture a vast amount of knowledge, and they're good at something called one-shot learning, which what that means is basically for a lot of things you can just ask the model and you get an answer without having to train it or give it some kind of training data. And last note here is that they're really good at in-context learning. And I will get to what that means a bit more in the next slide. But in make a long story short, it's basically they're good at inferring things that relates to what they've seen in their training data. Where they're weak are hallucinations. They have issues with reliability, and ultimately that's what makes it challenging to implement them in businesses. They're not good at reasoning or planning, and they have issues with out-of-context learning, meaning if you ask them something that they have not seen before in their training data like that, they will struggle. So let's just elaborate that a little bit, because this is kind of an important one to understand when it comes to automating things. Is to, like, if I'm thinking about pushing these models to the limit, what kinds of things, where can I expect them to break down? So I've already kind of hinted what the in context means and what the out of context means. I've provided here references to 2 research papers that go into these topics. So what they have found for the in context is that they're really great at inferring relationships, even if something wasn't directly shown to them in their training data. Like, you could ask them to, I don't know, take the style of some kind of a poet and apply that to a rap song, like in that shape. The model has not seen that anywhere, and yet it's able to do it. And so it's able to make those inferences as long as it's referring, and kind of establishing those relationships. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's capable of reasoning, but it's able to capture those relationships and kind of capture that A is to B, like, D is to E, like these types of relationships, and then apply them. Now, in the second paper here that says memorization versus generalization in pre-trained language models, they look at specifically things that the model didn't see in its training data. And what they were wondering about is this model capable of abstract reasoning? Like, so if it was trained, is it capable of learning, like, for instance, relationship between, I don't know, well, what happens, like, for instance, understanding the essence of programming, so that if it's asked something in a language it has never seen before, that it could apply that essence, for instance, of, like, the underlying, abstract reasoning that's tied to, like what you would be doing in programming. And what they found here is that it's really weak at that. And so, yeah, that's kind of the weakness. And planning is sort of another big one. So before we get moving further, I just wanted to say a few words about automation itself. So automation isn't like, and I purposefully picked automation and put that in this context because this is an area that has been explored quite a bit. Like, it's not like people haven't tried to automate business workflows before, and it's quite an established field. And you can kind of think about automation in 3 different categories. One would be like tackling a single task to automate. One would be to think about a workflow process and then try to understand what aspect of that process you could automate. And then the last one is hyper-automation. So when it comes to the process automation, you have 2 kinds of two types of automation you can apply. One is called robotic process automation, which is basically rule-based automation. And then there's intelligent process automation, which is applying AI and machine learning and more advanced methods to facilitate the automation. So again, even this joining of AI and automation isn't something that's new. Yeah, there are tools that are used to do this, and we ourselves have implemented this. Like, my brother and I were involved in an oil and gas project where we were looking at cost estimation for oil refineries based off of 2-dimensional schematic drawings. So there was a process in place that the cost estimators would go through. We needed to understand what goes in their mind and then identify aspects of that process that could be automated through AI. And we ended up helping them immensely. So that's process automation for you. From an LLM standpoint, large language models, it's the distinction is the LLM applied by itself for a task, or is it actually part of a bigger workflow? And that distinction matters. The last one, hyper-automation, will not go deep into it, but really what it means is kind of a more strategic company-wide application of automation where you step back and you ask yourself, what are all the different processes in this company, and let's match that with all the most appropriate technology to facilitate that automation. And that could be large language models, it could be anything you can think of, but it's kind of a more comprehensive look at it. And people have found when you take sort of this more comprehensive approach that your automation outcomes tend to be better. So that's just a few words about automation. Now I want to get to use cases and some of the patterns that emerge when it comes to use cases and applying large language models specifically to automate workflows. And before we get to that, I just want to quickly touch upon some of the key factors that determine whether or not your use cases is going to be hard or easy. So what makes something a low-hanging fruit? And you can kind of divide this in, by two dimensions. One is the conversational aspect of what you're deploying, and the other one is sort of the process aspect, or if you want the sort of the flow of the automation. So on the conversational side, there are questions like, is external data needed? External meaning, like, do I need to access my business data, or can I just use the large language model as it is? Is it hard? So if I do need business data, is it hard to retrieve? Is complex reasoning required? Is there domain-specific knowledge that is required? So let's say if I sell golf clubs and there's very particular terminology in my business that the LLM doesn't have, that means I need to train it to understand that terminology. And then an important one, are errors allowed? And lastly, the questions that is going to be asked of this model, are they generic or specific? So are we going to hone in on, let's say, providing services for TVs, or can the client ask pretty much anything that's out there? And so if you look at these 6 tiles here, if whenever you answer yes to any of these questions, it's going to bring up your difficulty level. That's kind of what this is meant to do, is give you kind of a framework to think about what makes things more difficult. And here on the process side of things, if I have just a single large language model that I'm applying, that would be the simplest case. Now, I can still have a very challenging use case if I'm saying yes to most of my things on the left side, but just in terms of automation and it being a part of a bigger workflow, that's the easiest one. The next one in the level of complexity is if you have multiple tasks that you have to perform, and maybe you have to invoke a large language model 4 times, but you are determining outside, so the logic of how to invoke it is not in the model, you're invoking it. So that would be the next level of complexity. The reason for that is because every model, every time you invoke it, it can make errors. And so if you have multiple steps where you invoke a large language model, your errors might start accumulating. So that's why this ends up being a more challenging task. And the last one is the most challenging one. That is pretty much when you have like an autonomous large language model that makes its own decisions. So let's say the large language model has to perform 5 tasks, and it will decide when to invoke each task. And we'll get to that. That would be the most difficult one. And you may ask, well, like, why would you come up with something like that? I'm not coming up with it. I'm telling you this because OpenAI is positioning their services in this manner. So they're talking, like if you read the literature out there, you will hear about agents in large language models. And that's kind of what that means. An agent makes its own decisions. And we'll get further into that. But this is kind of what decides the level of difficulty of your use case. On the one side, you have things that are more tied to what types of things you need to answer. And on the other side is, like, how is it structured? Is it a single step, multiple steps? Is the LLM making decisions, and it's plus multiple steps? So Now I will go through some patterns of use cases that, and then I'll articulate which one of them you'd categorize as easy or low-hanging fruit, and which ones would be more difficult. And like when we're talking about automation and which kinds of things have the most potential to bring value, but also to lead to job losses, these things that are the low-hanging fruits would be those. So the lowest hanging fruit one would be a case where you just have a large language model, symbolized here by this little robot, and it's interacting with a person. And out of the box, you're able to use that model and you don't have to do anything to it. It means it doesn't have to connect to your business data. So some use cases where you can do this is writing or programming, because the large language model will already have enough generic knowledge that it doesn't need anything else. So this can already be useful for marketing people, for instance. If you are crafting emails, if you are a programmer, it can provide help. So when you're looking at those numbers and they say 66% of companies are applying this, it's not necessarily the case that 66% are doing the hard use cases. Copilot has been put out by Microsoft, and companies are incorporating that, and that counts as well. And most of the things that Copilot does is of this nature. You're doing a PowerPoint presentation, and it's helping you along the way, but you don't really have to train that model on your specific business. And so this is also applicable anytime you're doing any kind of design. So what that means is, if you're using a program where you can script the the thing that you're working on. So like, for instance, with PowerPoint, you know that you can record macros, and there's it used to be Visual Basic Script. I don't know if they have changed it in the meantime, but there's a script that can generate your presentation or your Excel file. And so that's how it can be, even without Copilot, you could be able to have a conversation with a bot that generates a presentation for you using that code, just like you can ask it to write Python code for you. And this applies also to a lot of industrial type of applications, like AutoCAD. I don't know if you're familiar with that. AutoCAD is used for designing all sorts of things, from oil refineries to furniture and it just so happens that the models you create, there's also a script that you can create that goes along in generating those models. And so that opens up the opportunity to have a large language model assistant for those use cases as well. And they're low-hanging fruits. And then also, if you're creating 3D assets, like sometimes it's in gaming and sometimes it's in, like for other purposes, if you need like a 3D model of, people do that sometimes when they create products, and they'll create like a 3D model of a product to be used. So that's another area where you could, use this kind of a setup. Now, the disadvantage is that these models are not able to do reasoning. So when things get more complicated in your programming, they will not be able to help you. But if you're dealing with things like AutoCAD or 3D asset design, you could pre-train a model to, like, for instance, know how to create a 3D horse, or how to create a chair in AutoCAD. So there's opportunity there, but I consider this as a low-hanging fruit. In terms of the process involved, it's just a single large language model, so it's easy on that side. And the key point here is that errors are allowed, because you have a human in the loop, an expert, that will recognize the errors and have kind of a back and forth with the model if it's needed. Moving on. The next one, and this is one that I get asked a lot about by potential future clients. So they'll say, Rudy, I have a really simple use case. I would like to build a chatbot that's customer facing, and I want to I want to provide customer support so the customer can ask away. Well, this ends up being a difficult use case. Why? Well, in terms of the process factors, it's still just a single large language model, but in this case, errors are not allowed, and the user can ask anything. And also, a lot of the times the retrieval of the information from the business is not simple. So all those factors make this into a difficult use case. Now, if you narrow the scope of this use case and you say, well, the user is not going to be able to ask anything, it's just going to be pertaining to our warranties, then that makes it already simpler. And the other sort of scenario where I've seen this is kind of internal bots that could be used for training, or like a spoken interface into a data set or analytics capability, where you can ask things like, oh, who's my most successful sales rep, and like what kinds of revenue did he or she generate. Moving on. Now,
maybe just to add on the chatbot, Rudy, because yes, we do get many questions on that, and there's so many user cases out there, but there are very few which are really relevant and which have really shown impact. And I think everybody here on the call and yourself, I mean, we experience it every day, right? If it's banks, or there's so many bots all over the place, but how many bots are really providing the proper information? How many of them are really driving positive net promoter scores, or really driving satisfaction? So, and everybody feels that it's an easy use case, but as you said, it's really not, because it's so much dependent on the data. If you don't have enough data, it's just bound to be unsuccessful, right? And what it usually does is you create a bot which is then used for more internal purposes. So a bot which can support your agent, right? So it basically augments the agent capability rather than just replacing him, because that's, yeah, may appear like the holy grail and something we want quickly, but it's just not there yet. And I haven't seen it over the last years. And I've been chatting with many large BPOs, with leaders and CEOs running large shared service or in-house call centers. You know, it's not there yet, right? But if we look at the technology, we are anticipating that we are going to get there eventually, right? But it's really it's really a hybrid solution, and it's quite tricky. I fully agree with you.
I think it's not that it's impossible. If you narrow down the scope far enough, you can get, and you put in the effort to organize your data just the right way and your processes, you can get there. But it can't be generic. It can't be the customer can't just ask anything. And even then, when you narrow it down, you still have potential liabilities, and like you can get into a situation where the chatbot is doing something that it shouldn't be, and you didn't catch it with your guardrails.
Agreed.
Now, there is one more use case. So we had this sort of use case where you use the bot as an assistant. Here's one more that's kind of on the low-hanging side in terms of being a low-hanging fruit, which is extracting structured data from unstructured data. So this isn't actually a chatbot. This is more like using the large language model. Imagine a company where you are able to accept requests for quotes per email. Customers email you and you get lots of them. And right now you have people that process these emails and they enter them into a system, and then a quote gets emailed to the customer. Now, this is an actual use case, and I'll share in the references. There's a blog post on this of an actual practical use case that was implemented. Now, the way you would use the large language model here is you ask the model, is like, here is the email. You ask it, can you, so let's say this is a transportation company and the quotes are for how much it would cost to do some kind of a transfer of goods. So you say, here's the origin, here's the destination. I want to transport some furniture. Like this is how much it weighs. How much would this cost? And so the large language model would extract the relevant fields out of that, and then you go through a validation system. You check, does this make sense? Do I have everything I need? If I do, I send it directly to an automated system to generate the quote. If I am uncertain, so if I have any kind of red flags, I route it to a person to review. And so this was implemented. They were able to automate 87% of these requests. And so this is a very, like very attainable type of use case because the scope of it is narrowed. So you have a very specific task. You may have to fine tune the model to understand the intricacies of, requests for quote. But this one is one of those that has the potential to, well, on one side generate value and on the other side to replace people's jobs. Because here literally you have somebody that has been doing this, and think of this as, it could be requests for quotes, it could be invoices, it could be any time you have text that people have to process to put into a system. And the other place where, like this kind of a processing would be really relevant is, like sales reps are really, really terrible at entering data. They hate it. Like entering things into Salesforce. Like you could be looking at contact information that gets pulled in. In that case, you may, the manual person would be the sales guy that, if you're not able to automatically extract what you need, you send it for review. Otherwise, you put it in automatically. But this would be one that I think a lot of businesses could implement, and there's a lot of potential here. And risk is, you have the opportunity here. You still have a human in the loop, and you can, be more aggressive if you, feel like it. And it's also, yeah. So that would be one. Now here we have multiple steps. So that's from a processing side. This isn't just like a chatbot. Here we have a workflow where we have multiple steps involved, but the logic of those steps is controlled from the outside. Moving on, since we're kind of running tight with time, this third one is sort of a progression into the most complex type. And when OpenAI talks about agents, when you might read about a tool called LangChain, this is what they mean. So what does that mean? You have a large, so that they call them large language model agents. But these agents, what you do is you give them a set of tools or capabilities. You say, okay, this agent is going to be able to score a lead, to save a lead to Salesforce, to search Salesforce for a lead, to summarize a conversation, to do a Google search, get email and send email. And then I go in and I give it instructions. I say, okay, now for each one of my leads in Salesforce, identify if their company had a recent merger related press release and then notify me. So this is like, like more complex type of automation. And this would be a program that then, given that it has these capabilities, the large language model would come up with a plan of execution and would try to give you what you asked for. So if it's smart, it's going to go through Salesforce, go through every single lead, and provide what you asked for. So the benefit of this is it's going to a place where without coding, you're able to create basically very custom type of automation. And the thing here is you have the set of capabilities. You could just as well give it another set of instructions. You could tell it, look out at my email for potential prospects. And if it seems like it's a prospect, put it into my Salesforce. Or like go through all the companies I have in my Salesforce and backfill any information you can find on the internet. So it opens up a whole new world of opportunities. And eventually, we're going to get there. But today, we're not there. The problem with this approach is that it requires multiple steps of reasoning. And these large language models right now are really not good at that. And so that's really where, why the difficulty level for this type of application is high. And the thing is, the reason I'm emphasizing this is most people that think about automation and large language models, they're going to go to agents because that's what they will find. And what I'm trying to say is that if you want to work something reliably, don't do it. Now, the problem is not with the agents. The problem is with the complexity of the task. If you have multiple steps that are involved, you're likely going to have errors that you will have a hard time to make sure that they don't happen, because everything, the logic is in the large language model, and you can't influence that easily. So I will quickly go through some of the tools and let my brother dive into the demo because we're running out of time. I just wanted to touch upon these agents because that's what a lot of people attempt to use. An agent, you can think of it like a program where you give it a task, and inside there's a large language model that does the reasoning. And as I mentioned, it has a set of tools or capabilities through which it interacts with the environment. Like, for instance, when you go and use ChatGTP, it now has this browse function, or it has multiple types of function. It has a DALL-E function where you could ask it to generate an image, and it knows to invoke DALL-E to create that image for you. Or if it doesn't know something, it will go to the internet. But typically, these interactions, involve using a single tool. But what I was telling you before is like you give it a really more useful type of task, like you would give an assistant, a human being, to perform for you. That's where it gets more challenging. So what I wanted to say is the complexity of this agent is what makes it difficult. It's not necessarily that you're using an agent. So LangChain is a framework that allows you to do all sorts of things with large language models. And among other things, they support agents. They have 15 different types of agents. They have the ability to support a memory for the agent, which could be either short-term or long-term, with the long-term being a vector database. And there's support for like over 40 of them. There's a planning module, and then there's a set of actions and tools. And the tools can interact, so they have multiple connectors in there. An ability like Google search is implemented for you. So the reason people go to this, and this is convenient, is because you have all of this implemented. But what I would say is, if you go this route and you want it to be reliable, you want to keep this agent as simple as possible. It's best to create multiple agents where every agent maybe does just one step, but don't let them reason over multiple steps, because that creates errors that propagate, and that makes them unreliable for production use. So that's LangChain. This is OpenAI. They have an assistant API. The difference here, so pretty much they provide a similar thing that LangChain has. You have the ability to invoke these functions. They have made this so that the memory tracking is done automatically. So they have this managed conversation session which keeps track of what the interactions and the context. So you don't have to do that explicitly or manually. And the other thing that they're better at than LangChain is, when should I be invoking a function? So if I have a browse function, how do I know when to invoke it? Like the large language model has to decide that. The logic is not outside. And what I want to say is that OpenAI has improved that, and they're better in knowing when to invoke a function, and they can invoke more complicated functions than LangChain can. So that's kind of the distinction. Now, there's another framework called AutoGen for Microsoft. What that allows you to do is fire up multiple agents or multiple instances of a model and use them to get to an answer. The reason this is useful is you could have ChatGTP and Bard and whatever model you want, and whenever you ask a question, you require them to agree on the answer. And there is research that shows when you do this, that the performance improves. But the other thing you can do is you could build agents for different subtasks. Rather than having that one agent that goes out and does all those tasks, you can have one agent that saves the lead, one agent that looks up the company online. So you make like a lot of special purpose agents that are thinner, and then you let them collaborate. And that's what this framework can be used for. Last thing is workflow automation software. As I mentioned before, automation is a very established field, and there's very established tools for this. Among other companies, Microsoft has one, UiPath has one, IBM has one. These are tools where you can basically create like a workflow, and like every step will be like a task that you can perform, and the tasks usually they'll have like a library of tasks, like read email, send email, like score lead. All those would be like tasks that you can assemble in a workflow and then automate a process. Now, what they have ended up doing is they've started incorporating generative AI as a task that you can infuse. And so since we're talking about automation within the context of workflows, this is a very natural place to do it. And I'm gonna, at this time, let my brother kind of go over an overview. I think we're gonna run over time. I apologize about that up front. If you guys have to leave, the recording will be available and you can review it.
Okay, so hi guys, I hope you can hear me, and I hope you see what I see, right?
I'm gonna have to stop sharing, right?
I've started sharing my
good,
screen.
Good, we're good.
Yes, so thank you, Rudy, and we don't have a lot of time, but I hope you'll bear with me. As Rudy said, I would like to show you some of these concepts that we discussed, and the environment I picked is from Microsoft called Power Automate. It's a platform for robotic process automation, and we already mentioned that there was some hype about robotic process automation a few years back. It's not dead, but people found it, not the holy grail. I think that the LLMs and the AI changes that are coming are only helping the robot process automation. What I'd like to say here is that from someone who usually finds these tools a little, at some point, counterproductive, the advantages of them that I see are that they provide one place to access thousands of different functions, a library, basically, a very rich library, and they're a place to orchestrate these tasks. Yeah, so those are the benefits. Now, how did Microsoft go about infusing AI and LLMs into this Power Automate platform? Well, one case is let's say one case is using, or they've introduced this AI builder or co-pilot, and if you go about and you want to start a new process, a new flow, right? And you decide maybe you want to get stock news. You will create a new flow, and before you still have the options to manually do things, right? But now with the co-pilot, you can rely on the co-pilot, and here is the first thing that you'll notice still. So we will ask the co-pilot to create a floor for us to fetch some news about Microsoft, and it's going to come back and say, sorry, I don't understand, it's too complicated, right? It's still usable, but as you can see, it is not able to resolve more complex cases. But if you then go back and then divide up your task into, you ask it to create an action to connect to a website, right? It's going to work on that, and it will create the appropriate task, but it's missing some parameters. And if you open it up, you'll find that, for example, it missed, there are several methods to get something from the web. It's missing this one parameter. So then you can talk to it. You can ask it to edit existing items, elements, add new ones. Here I can tell it to make this web request into a get method, right? And it's going to work on this flow, and it will update it. And now, as you can see, the method is get. So it's ready to pull something from morning news. of course, I asked it to use Morningstar as a good place, right? But the request itself, it's still not really, it's just going to the website. So I need to be a little more specific in what I need. So you ask more questions from it. You say, please, make it more special so that I go to the web part of the website that will fetch me Microsoft News, right? And then you proceed to the next step and you say, and here is where I didn't really spend a lot of time formatting anything, but you say something like extract the body out of this web request. And now the body is going to be, okay, the body, it says to extract the body. So it asked me to do it for it, but I could also tell it to just extract the HTML. The request, and hopefully it will create this next task that we need. Okay, so it's done something to our website response, and it's created some text, and then finally I can tell it to create the last task, which is basically send me all of this in an email, and it's going to edit my flow with this final step. And here again, there are some invalid parameters. Although I will manually edit them, but news about stocks, and we will pull in some text from the previous step, and after that we will save the flow, and we can then invoke it, right? You can test it manually, trigger it manually. This is how we do that. Run the flow, wait for a little bit, done, and if everything went fine, something should be arriving momentarily in my inbox here. Let's see if I just have the right inbox. Yes, so this is what it did, right? So it's difficult to read, but there is a feed of news that's coming from Morningstar that you could format properly, get titles and content out of it, and it did this. And as you can see, what I wanted to just show here is how this AI, how this Copilot helps you, how it helps you easily create flows and edit them right on the fly. As you also saw, it basically at some points it has issues following your instructions. It might miss certain parameters, so at some point you will probably maybe give up and do it yourself, right? But within a couple of minutes, I created a flow that will go out and do some things while I sleep, right? It will pull in information for me and prepare them in my inbox. The reason I selected email as an example to show here, and here is another example, is I think email is a good test bed for a lot of these ideas that we've discussed, right? It is a platform. You send emails. There is a recipient. There is a sender. So you can talk back, and it's a platform, email as itself, where unstructured text is coming in, and you could do a lot of things with it, right? And like Rudy was saying, that one of the use cases is turn that unstructured text, unstructured text into structured text, right? So what does that mean? Well, here is one flow that initially I started out with Copilot. At some point it turned into a little more complicated, so I had to switch to manually finish it. But it's a process where you know, you listen to your email inbox, you immediately respond to the sender saying thank you for you know, submitting your request. Then you invoke a ChatGPT and you ask it to do something. It could be anything, but in this case, what I did is I asked it to categorize the text that's coming in as either being an issue reported, order placed, or a critical comment. And based on that classification, I then, you know, I set up different flows. Now, look at this here. If you are a beginner, this might be very, this might leave an impression at you because it looks visual and it kind of, you know, it seems like it's easy. The more you work with these type of visual guides, the more you'll find that they constrain you. So what I find in this new world of AI very useful is if the Copilot allowed me to describe a flow, describe a problem or a solution, and I could just leave it at that, right? It might be able to create this workflow for me, but if you write something in Python, if you write something in a programming language, the interpreter, the compiler, usually in the back will parse your programming, you know, your method, your algorithm, and it will create a workflow like this, right? This is called an execution plan. People who work with SQL probably know it best. There's usually an option in SQL databases where once you create a SQL query, it shows you the execution plan. This is the execution plan, and what I'm saying here, it's nice to visualize it, but working on more complicated workflows visually becomes a little bit of an impediment. So that's maybe one of the reasons these robotic process automation tools kind of have a bad rep in some way. But nevertheless, if there was a tab here to switch between the visual and maybe something that is more programmatic, that is more Python-like or JavaScript-like, it would be more suitable for someone like me, right? But yeah, you can set it up and you just you know, you start it, and then what happens is so it's up and running, right? So there is a customer support workflow that I've just set up, and it took me maybe 5 minutes. And what that basically now does is I have here a client, right? I can create a new email. I will send it to this vendor and their service account, and I will say something like, you know, your chatbot. And I will say something like, your bot really sucks, right? So what this is supposed to do is it's supposed to go over on the service side and come in as a message momentarily, and it should be, so here it is, and now the workflow is going to kick in, and it's supposed to categorize this message, and it should send it over to this sub folder called critical feedback, right? You can do more. You could do more with it at some point. You could extract. You could send a message back to the. So it was sent into critical feedback, but this subfolder just shows you that it was sent into a queue. In that queue, it could be processed differently. It could be some structured data could be extracted out of it. You name it. Also, I took here emails as an example, but inputs and outputs in these workflows, they could be, you know, they could be Google Drive, they could be Slack chat channels, they could be team chats, they could be anything, basically. But so the main thing is that messages are being exchanged, right?
Well, just one thing to emphasize here. So Microsoft has taken all those capabilities around ChatGPT and they have exposed them as tasks that you can infuse in your workflows here. So in this case, he was using actually ChatGPT.
Yes,
or GTP.
Yes, and here is another email. I will say that you know, when I click on this button, nothing happens, right? I'm sending it to the same guys, So for the first email, I just got a response back that says, "Thank you for your message. We received it and it's being processed." Now the second email was sent out. Now I'm talking about a possible issue. I'm one of your clients, and something is not working right in your application, and it's going to now start doing that, and it should send it into this folder that's called help desk, right? But in addition to that, on the client side, I should have received a new email, right, that says, this has been identified as an issue. Our help desk team has been notified, and here is some links you can, monitor your progress. We value your feedback. So anyways, it's kind of a quick example of, and you've seen that it takes maybe 5 minutes to set up these workflows. From the automation perspective, the LLMs, the AI are making things much easier. I see two different places where it can be used. First, as these tasks that can give you more value, that can categorize, that can summarize, that can translate, even perform some kind of Q&A back and forth, right? In some of these chatbots we've implemented, we would open up the chatbot to any kind of questions, and if it's maybe a chatbot that serves hiring data, you'll get questions something like, "What's the best job in Chicago?" What do you mean, what's the best job in Chicago? It's a very ambiguous question. So at that moment, you are already in a different level of problems, right? You have to resolve that ambiguity before you provide some good answer. And so there are different levels of cognition that AI and LLMs are able to solve, and you have to be mindful of them. Is it just simply summarizing something? Is there ambiguity that I need to reply back and forth? And at some point, I think, as Rudy mentioned, with these agents, with Gemini, with A-Star that OpenAI are developing, we will see systems that perform reasoning. And with reasoning, what I mean is a system that will develop a plan of objectives that are leading towards a goal. So it will talk to you, it will resolve any ambiguities, and then it will create a plan for you. Now, I don't think we are there yet. So yeah, that's what I wanted to show you, just a simple example of what's possible at the moment. Sharing. Oh, actually, let me just share the last slide of here. Here is the last slide of our presentation. So yeah, it's very easy now, and I think that the LLMs, the AIs, are breathing new life into the entire idea of robot process automation. Still, I think robot process automation, the best value they give you is it's one place to with a lot of connectors and a big reach and a place to orchestrate tasks. But the automation doesn't have to happen through robot process automation. It could happen through Kafka. It could happen through other systems, right? It's just there are certain things you need, right? You need tasks, you need orchestration, you need access to different data sources. And once you have that, you could be using Microsoft, IBM, or your own system. So that's it.
Yeah, this kind of brings us to the end of our presentation. So while there's a lot of hype around generative AI, there's also real impact. There's real value. And if you have tried out ChatGPT from the early days, you might have noticed that already in terms of the types of help that it can provide you. I, for my part, had to reinstall my operating system the other day, and I was running into issues with drivers and whatnot, and I was just asking it step by step, and it helped me through the process. So it's difficult to deny, to say that, like, there's just no value there. And I think businesses are realizing that, and some of it is more complicated, some of it is more risky. So There's definitely a distinction between the level of difficulty and also the level of value that you get. Obviously, if you had a chatbot that could generically talk to a customer, that would be great. It would be very valuable. But if right now that's just not in the a possibility, then it might be more hurtful to go down that route. And it would be maybe more wise to focus on the things that can much easier get the value to you. Because one thing that you can see here is there is a progression here happening. And yes, there's hype, but there's definitely going to be improvements that are coming. And I don't think that this technology is going to go away. And so then the question is, well, what can you do to prepare? Do you just wait for it to kind of, to resolve and get a better understanding of where generative AI will end up before you dive into it? And I'd say the answer is kind of twofold. One, it would be wise to come up with a strategic roadmap as far as how to get your data ready for these types of AI applications. And it's not just for the LLMs, it's for any kind of AI application. You need to make sure that you capture the relevant knowledge in your organization and that you start treating data that way, that it's an important asset. And structured in a way that the relevant information is properly organized, but also easily retrievable. So a lot of companies have not done that. Their data is all over the place. Disparate sources of data. If you need to retrieve something, you need like 5 layers of logic just to get to the information that you need. And that is a problem. And it ends up being something that comes back to bite these businesses. The other thing that one can do is to also think about all the various processes that happen within an organization and then try to hone in on sub aspects of those processes that would lend themselves to being automated through AI. So rather than thinking about AI as something that will come in and replace employees and people, to think more of it as something that will empower people and allow one employee to do 5 times the amount of work that they would usually do. And the way you do that is to kind of assess your processes that you have in place and then think about where there's opportunity, and that opportunity doesn't have to be the whole thing. Lastly, I'd say out of all the things that we mentioned, it's the assistive chatbots and it's the unstructured data that would be the really lowest hanging fruits. And that would be a very good initial question, is to ask yourselves, with those 2 capabilities, is there value that I could add to my current processes? Because that would likely lead to, first of all, a boost in productivity and at a low risk. So that kind of concludes our webinar today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I will look through LinkedIn and the comments and see if there were any questions. And apologies for running over.
No, thank you, Rudy and Amr, very much. I think there's so much to unpack, right? And as we mentioned in the early beginning about uncertainty, I think you're giving a little bit of a roadmap on what needs to be done, and this is great, because at the end of the day, we can ask for as much as AI as we want. If we don't have the right data, if we don't have the right processes or the basics in place, it's going to be a very big challenge to really implement and get some low-hanging fruits, even, right? And I do believe that it starts with also the company strategy. I mean, what is really the strategy of the organization, right? What are the areas? Do I really have the pain points? And is AI the solution I need? And if I agree with the leadership that it is, how do I go about it? And that's, I think, what when we need guidance, when we need Sherpas like you, Rudy, and Amr, who can guide us through this noise and through this forest of opportunities to really shortlist what is I can do with that tool, which is quite fantastic. And I'm sure it is going to be continue to be interruptive and to change the business and the way we do things.
All right.
So really appreciate your time.
Thank you,
I don't know
guys.
if there are any pending questions. What I understand is that we're going to have a couple more of those, right? This is part of a series of webinars we're going to have. Do send us questions. If there are any specific areas you would like Rudy or Armor to deep dive into, let us know. One thing which we will be doing is to do the next series on very specific topics. So based on your inputs, it will help us to also define which areas or focal areas we should have and where we can deep dive. So don't hesitate to pop us any questions, send some of the remarks. The contact information will be provided, and I'm really looking forward to the next sessions.
Same here.
Rudy and Amr, thank you very much.
Thank you.